David Fincher, Mr. Fincher. I'm telling you, I'm saying this with the expectation that you may not listen, but if you do, could we at least cut it down to 50 takes? At least. At least.
I think he's someone with at least enough of a reputation that he can ask for 100 takes, which I think is awesome. Like, who's going to say, no, I'm not going to do 100 takes to David Fincher?
I probably would. I probably would. I have like this grandiose vision of myself that's probably not real, but sometimes I'm like, I'm too good for this. But then I'm kind of not, but also I could be. I think
that's a little bit of the patriarchy in you. It's a little bit of the,
you're right.
The male entitlement.
Hey, you're right. I mean, yeah. Who'd have thought? Not me. Hello, everyone. My name is Jason Ramirez, and welcome to another episode of the Hit List Podcast, a podcast where me and a guest cross off films from our watch list and discuss them. Today, I'm joined by writer and film enthusiast, Caterina. Welcome, Kat. Thank you so much for being here.
Hi, thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be part of it all.
So before we get started, I do have a couple questions for you, little icebreaker questions. So,
Alrighty.
What's something about you that people would be surprised to know?
Surprised to know. Okay, I'll say two things because I don't know exactly what you're looking for here. Mm-hmm. One thing is surprised that I'm Peruvian. A lot of people, when I say that, they look at me and they're like, "You're Peruvian? You don't look Peruvian." And then I'll be like, "Well, I'm half Peruvian, half Italian." And they're like, "Oh, that makes sense. You definitely look Italian. I don't see you as Peruvian." I'm like, "Okay." And it just like hurts a little bit because it's like, that's a part of who I am. So it's like, anyway. But, and then the other one is that I'm very into like Greek mythology. And I think a lot of people assume because of that, like I read Percy Jackson growing up and I didn't. Like I did not watch the movies. I did not read the books at all. I just like on my own kind of became like a really big like reader of Greek mythology and Roman mythology and just mythology and like legends and fairy tales in general. But like specifically Greek mythology, I'll talk about it a lot and people are like, "Oh, did you like read Percy Jackson growing up?" And I'm like, no.
So yeah, first, I didn't know there was like a certain Peruvian look, you know, like
it's
like
very
you just look
indigenous.
Okay. I guess I just haven't met many Peruvians, that's why.
Yeah, like it's like very much like more, that's a stereotype at least. Like, you know, like obviously, well, in Peru, there's like a lot of like colorism. There's like you either look very, very white or you look very like, you know, from the mountains, like very like dark skinned, like indigenous looking. So I basically look like a colonizer when I go to Peru, which is so fun. Love that for me. But yeah, so I think a lot of people have that like stereotype when they think of like Peruvians, like Colombians, I think to a certain extent also get like similar like stereotypes. I think Mexican people probably have similar stereotypes where it's like if you're very white looking, it's like, "Oh, I don't see you as like that." Like that nationality.
I get that. For me, it's like, I don't know how to properly explain this. I'm surprised when people can tell I'm Latino for some reason. I don't know.
Interesting. Okay.
Like, for example, when I was in Denmark a few years ago, the people who could tell automatically were Spanish people, like people from Spain. It's like, hablas español. Like, wait, how'd you know? like, bro, you're in Denmark. You kind of stand out.
That's
so. But also, like, the thing with the Greek mythology, I was also really into Greek mythology. It's kind of what led me into getting to Percy Jackson, but only like the first 5 books. So I was like, when you say Greek mythology, I was gonna say, "Oh, did you read Percy Jackson?" Like, and you said automatically you haven't.
No.
What? Why? Why not?
I mean, okay, so like when I was younger, I was just like not very into like YA. Like I was just like never like the YA that I would read would be like, I don't want to say fucked up, but like darker. Like I read a lot of like Christopher Pike. I read a lot of like Lois Duncan, which are like stories about like people getting murdered and like betrayal and like sex and stuff like that. Like I read a lot of like books about like thrillers written for kids. Like, you know, like people getting kidnapped and having to like solve the mystery and stuff like that. So like I think it was a little bit too like fantasy for me. I kind of like sometimes like don't really feel like I gave myself a childhood in that sense, that like I didn't let myself enjoy. Like I was literally in middle school. I was like a 12-year-old reading about like people like crime scenes, and like I was like watching like, you know, Law and Order SVU, and like watching movies like with my one of my favorite genres when I was in high school was film noir. Like I just loved like dark, gritty, like thriller movies. Like I loved like Shutter Island was like one of my favorite movies. Like I don't think I kind of like thought of myself as like edgy, but just like definitely like I was like I like darker material. And now I'm like, damn, I wish I had read Percy Jackson. I like actually one of my friends is like a huge fan, and she's been telling me, especially since the like new show on Disney came out, she's been telling me that I should like read them. And then she'll be like, oh yeah, so the first series is 5 books or however many books, and there's a second series, and there's this third series, and I'm like, this is so much, like. But eventually I'll probably get into it.
Yeah, I remember like my first foray into like darker material. I was like 14 and I saw this anime called Naoki Urasawa's Monster. And for those of you who are not familiar, it's not a very popular anime, not because it sucks, but because it just never got like too mainstream, which I think was fine. It's how do I explain this in a very short period? It's about a Japanese doctor in Germany after the Berlin Wall, like a few years after the Berlin Wall fell, and he saves he chooses to save a boy who got shot in the head, who got to the hospital first instead of like the local governor or whatever politician, and he gets demoted down. Like he was an amazing surgeon, he was gonna be like the top of the hospital. He gets demoted because of that. Because if he'd gone to the politician, he probably would have stayed a politician, but the politician died, but the boy lived, and he's angry about this whole demotion. And then he later on, the people who demoted him all die from poisoning, right? And they all suspect him, but there's no evidence. Turns out it was the boy who killed them, the boy he saved. And because he was like venting to him, like when he was like, and the boy's in a coma after the surgery, and I guess the boy heard all that and he wanted to help the guy, and
Wow.
no one figured it out until like many years later. The boy is now a man, and he's kind of like running his own type of cult, and he basically wants to commit like the perfect suicide where anyone who ever knew him dies before he kills himself. So, and I was like 14 watching this. I'm like, what the fuck am I watching? So, yeah.
Yeah, that sounds really intense for a 14-year-old.
Right. And I got into it, and I never really finished it, but I feel like I should finish it because, you know, a lot happens. A lot happens. But anyway, let's get to the to the topic of today.
On that note.
Today, we'll be discussing Peeping Tom. Peeping Tom is a 1960 British psychological horror thriller film directed by Michael Powell and written by Leo Marks. The film revolves around a serial killer who murders women while using a portable film camera to record their dying expressions of terror, putting his footage together into a snuff film used for his own self-pleasure. The film stars Cara Boehm, Anna Massey, and Moira Shear. So this film was on both of our lists, but Kat, can you tell me why this was on your list?
I'm not gonna lie, I probably added it like a long time ago, so I don't know I can't remember exactly why. I can tell you the most likely reasons. One, I've watched a lot of Hitchcock, as I think most people do. And this movie is like really related to like Hitchcock. I think it was influenced a lot by Hitchcock's films and influenced a lot of his later films. The main reason that probably it was on my list was because there was a point a few years ago when I was really into gialli films, which for people who don't know are like Italian thrillers that were very popular in the 60s and 70s. One of the main directors for it is Dario Argento, who I think is like a really, really amazing director, and I think everyone should watch some of his movies. If you're into like thrillers and gore and stuff like that, like if it's too intense, like I understand. Peeping Tom is considered, I think, like the genesis basically for a lot of like later slasher thriller films. So basically I think like the way that it worked was Peeping Tom kind of like is believed to have led into Dario Argento's films, which is believed to have led into the slasher films of the late 70s and 80s, I think, or late 80s. So like Halloween was like considered like one of the first slashers of American culture. So basically that's like the timeline. And I think because I've always been into slashers, like American slashers, and I started watching Giallo, and I think I was like, okay, well, I need to go back to the Genesis, and I think that's how I ended up watching, like having Peeping Tom on my list. It probably also just came up during like my initial introduction to film when we were talking about like voyeurism and spectatorship in cinema. But yeah, why was it on your watch list?
Yeah, similar to you, it was also on my list like for a very long time. But I think the reason why is because I was making a horror movie back in college, and I was not a fan of the genre then. I still consider myself a scaredy cat. So I was trying to say like what to watch, what could I do on a budget, like other examples of stuff that had been done on budget, or like how you could imitate other things. And Peeping Tom was like, it was used in an article saying like it's like the genesis of like the slasher film. And I was like,
Yeah.
oh, that's interesting. I guess I'll add it to my list. I didn't have time to watch it, but I think if I watched it, I probably would have made a better horror movie.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
What aspects of it do you think would have contributed to making a better horror movie?
I think the everything about it. Like my horror film was just really bad. Like the first
Okay.
2 minutes, it's a very short film. It's like 6-8 minutes at least.
Okay.
The first 2 minutes, I think you can tell I cared about it, but then as it went on, my enthusiasm for the film just like went down the drain. And
Dropped
this is
off.
for
Yeah.
school. This is for school too.
Mm-hmm.
So it wasn't like, oh, I probably should put more effort into something I'm gonna put on my own personal channel. No, this is for school. This is for a grade. And as long as I had it done, I got the grade. But
Yeah.
I guess I guess for me it would have been like the cinematography could have been better.
Mm-hmm.
The element of like building up the suspense, you know,
Mm-hmm.
like the danger, the stakes. So
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, it's just talk about my
I
own
mean, like,
failures. It's
no, I don't think it's. I mean, I guess like I think it's important to have failures because I think it's important to like learn from them. Disney specifically talks a lot about like how he would not have been able to be like as successful as he was without failing.
Mhm.
I think like Meet the Robinsons, like a huge part of it is like, you know, keep moving forward. Like the more you fail, the better you become.
Yeah, gotcha.
So you
Eh,
basically you learn from it. But
yeah, but yeah. About this film, what did you think about it?
I really enjoyed it. Like again, like I'm like someone like I love Gialli films, and this was very very similar to Gialli films. Like I was writing notes as I was watching the movies, and as I was watching the movie, and I literally wrote like, "Oh my god, it's so Dario Argento," which like I love Dario Argento, so like I was just like fawning over it. It was like basically just like a British version of Dario Argento films. I really enjoyed it. I think it's very much like a film that like unless you're like a film person, like someone who really likes like film history and like cinema as medium, then you might not love it. Like it might be kind of boring because it's not like a slasher film in like the traditional like suspense and
Mm-hmm.
like I think that like there's very very little blood. I think it's like basically just at the end, and it's definitely not like Friday the 13th or anything like that. So if you're expecting like, you know, like jump scares and thrillers, I don't think you're really gonna get a lot of that. I think the quote that I would say probably is what I think of when I was watching this film is in the show Community. Shirley has this line when she says, like she's talking about movies, about making movies, about making movies. Like, come on, Charlie Kaufman, some of us have work in the morning, damn. And I think that's what people would probably think of when they watch this movie. Just like, okay, it's just a movie about making movies. Like, we get it. It's kind of masturbatory, if that makes sense. Like, it's like
Yeah.
very much like, it's like a director talking about, oh my God, it's so hard being a director. And we'll probably end up talking about Michael Powell because I started reading some things about him, especially during the filming of this movie, that just made me like, oh my God, you've got to be kidding me.
Mm. Yeah, that's something that I think I saw this a long time ago. Someone said the only accurate portrayal of any type of work in film is filmmaking, because because you're there, you know. Like this, the only example I can think of at the mind right now is with Supernatural, where I didn't see this episode. I just saw like a video of it on YouTube, where the characters Sam and Dean go into the real world in the bodies of their actors, right? And but they're still Sam and Dean in their mind, and so they're
Uh-huh.
interacting with the set. They're interacting with the other actors who play the other characters, and they're like, Cassiel, what's going on here? And it's like the actor who's playing it. He thinks he's playing with them, and he's like, "Oh, you guys are Jensen. You're so funny, man." and
Oh my god.
and he just sees like how like it's all a set, like
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
you can create like reality out of the set, but like you pull the camera back a little bit, you move a couple of things, it's just all a set, and then just how kind of you can see they're kind of going a little crazy, like what, this is not a show, this is our life. But anyway, that's the only thing that's what came up in mind, is like the only accurate portrayal of any type of industry is in film is filmmaking.
Right.
But yeah, so like what was going through your mind? You said like this is so Dario Argento. What else was going through your mind as you were watching this film?
Definitely within the first like opening sequence, because it's a woman, like a streetwalker, sex worker, prostitute, I don't know, whatever you would call her, that she, goes, like, she takes on a John, she takes him up to her room, and then she is murdered by him. And it was just that immediate feeling of like that it's like this woman being undressed for the camera, like the fact that it's like what we're gonna end up talking about, basically just like the male gaze, and just like how there's a lot of violence against women in general, and then violence against women specifically in cinema. How even just like the fact that like you have a camera in a woman's face is violence, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
It made me start thinking about like one thing, it actually immediately made me think of the opening scene to Halloween. I don't know if you remember it. It's you see it from the perspective of young Michael Myers when he's like 6 years old, but it's like literally from his eyes. And so it's like his older sister was having sex, I think, or she had just finished having sex and she was like getting dressed, or she was brushing her hair or something. And then he kills her, or he like stabs her. I think she ends up dying, but I'm not sure. But it's just like, yeah, it's just like this like immediate violence against women, that like women being targeted for their sexual power, just the feeling of like the transactional aspect to it, I guess, also that like prostitution as cinema in a way, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Like that, like you're kind of paying to see someone, that you're paying for the pleasure of voyeurism, basically. You're like, that film is voyeurism. It was just immediately going down the rabbit hole of like all of like film theory, basically. It was like I couldn't stop and just enjoy the film without just going into like all of basically just all of what the discussion around this film is. To be fair, I probably did read some like analysis of it before going into it, but yeah, just in general, like the immediacy of how violent against women slasher films are, and just film in general is.
Yeah, I get that. For me, it was kind of different. The way I try to like view a movie, I try to turn off my brain, because I know
I should.
No, it doesn't matter like what film. It doesn't matter if it's like a popcorn movie. It doesn't matter if it's like a art house movie. I try to turn it off because I don't want to like view it from like the context in mind. I try to like take it in first and then analyze it afterwards. So I think I've trained myself to be dumb when I'm watching the movie, but not dumb in a sense, but like observant. But like the thing that was going through my mind as I'm watching the opening scene, like I said, like he goes up to the street to the sex worker, like I know he's gonna kill her, but like it's just like the build up, the suspense, and the dramatic irony. Like we know she's gonna die, but she doesn't know it. So yeah, so that's how I viewed it. With
Right.
that, and then
I think
as
another thing. Oh, go ahead.
no, you go ahead.
No, I was just saying another thing that stuck out to me was like in the first opening sequence was, I think that there's like a close up of her eye or his eye that then like transitions into like a shot of like a like a film lens or something.
Mm-hmm.
And it made me think of the shot, I think it's in Psycho, when like the circling of the drain, like of her blood going down the drain, turns into like an image of an eye. And just in general, like the use of eye in general in film, and how immediately it just makes you think of like voyeurism and like the camera as eye. But again, I don't know if that's something that just because like as a film major, I was kind of trained to do that. Like, and especially to constantly be making comparisons in my head to other movies. But yeah, I wish I could turn off my brain, but I'm just constantly sitting there just like analyzing every little thing that's happening. Like I'm someone who like I hate it when people like talk during movies, or like I have to like, or when people are like not watching the screen, like if someone's like scrolling on their phone, because I'm like every single thing that's happening is important. Like every single line of dialogue is important. Every single like little cut, little edit that whoever made is important. Like you can't miss a single thing without missing some aspect of the film.
Mm-hmm.
I think maybe that's like a little bit extra, like with like certain modern like methods of filmmaking, that you don't really need to take in every single aspect of it. I think they are like, there are a lot of movies nowadays that are basically just meant to be like taken in like half paying attention.
Yeah, for sure.
But I try not to be that person. Like I try to like watch everything that's happening and like analyze everything.
I get that. I think you'd be a great person to go to the movie with. Like, I like that. Like, you're not going to be
Oh,
on the
I'd be
phone.
irritating. Do not, do not.
Wait, what do you mean? What do you mean irritating?
Because like I'm like I'm just too like, again, like I'll be like snapping at you if you're like watching, like if you're like staring at your phone, like get off your phone, or I'll be like making little quips and comments. Like even yesterday I made a comment, I can't remember what it was, but like my friends always make fun of me. They're like, you're such a pretentious film major. Like you're just always have to like act like, and I think I try so hard not to act like a film major, and I think like when I'm around other people, like I tell them like, if you were around other film majors, trust me, you would not think I'm that pretentious. But like around like, you know, just like the layman film enjoyer, yeah, I'm a little bit pretentious.
Okay, I get that. I see what you mean. I feel like for other people who like films, you know, like who respect the theater going experience, you know, I think that's what you mean.
You would, yeah, maybe I'd get
Yeah.
more along with them depending on
Yeah.
the film.
All right, so what were your favorite scenes in the movie?
Oh God, that's a hard question. I mean, I guess like the first one that comes to mind is the dance sequence. I don't know. It was like my immediate thought was, Jesus, this is so beautiful. And it was just so tragic to me because it was just like, you knew she was going to die. Like this poor woman, you knew she was going to die. And you just see the happiness in her face. Like she's just like lost in the movement. She's just enjoying herself. And it was so sad. Like it was like, this is a woman who just has this zest for life kind of. And you just see him being so focused and like, you know, training like moving the lights and moving the camera, and like you just know that something bad's gonna happen, and it just made me really sad. And I think that I can't remember the name of the actress, but she also worked in another really popular Powell film. She was the main actress in The Red Shoes. And she also played a dancer in that film. And there's just something really striking about her face that I think I was just kind of in awe of her. I'm trying to think of like what other scenes really stood out to me. I think the one where I just really also liked, I can't remember her name, but the resident, was it Helen? The woman that he was like kind of becoming like a love interest with. I just found her very endearing. But another scene that really stuck out to me was when there are the two models that he's there to kind of like photograph. And then there's the one that had her face kind of like away from the camera. And then she turns and she's like disfigured on half of her face. That she has something, I don't know if it was like she was born with it or if it was something like an accident that happened. But like his immediate like fascination, I think, was really interesting to see.
Right.
And I couldn't tell where it was coming from, and I don't know if it was like it was also kind of like the male gaze and like the fetishization of it for a moment, but it was like her shocked at how appreciative he was. I think that he wasn't like horrified by her appearance, that I think was really moving. Were there any specific scenes that stuck out to you?
For me, it's the scene after where the dancer's body is in like that luggage, and they're trying to shoot this scene. And I thought, like thinking to myself, I think it's Mark's his name, and Mark's
Right, yeah,
hastiness.
Mark.
I thought he forgot to like move the body, but then you figure out.
I didn't think about that he did it on purpose. He wanted to record.
Yeah, he
their
wants
reaction.
to record exactly.
Oh my God, I'm so dumb that I didn't think of that.
And I was like, the whole time thinking like, wait, did he forget? Oh no, he meant for this. He kind of knew they were gonna do this, or like he positioned
That's
himself
crazy.
exactly
No, because
where.
I thought of it where he did it unintentionally, like he forgot it, but then he was like, oh, I might as well get a reaction video out of it.
And
No,
that
he
could,
did it on purpose. That's crazy.
and it could be interpreted both ways as well. But he could have taken advantage of the moment. But I think it's like he did that on
No, it seemed very
purpose.
intentional. Yeah.
And I think we talked about this during our tech rehearsal of how directors will try to use like real reactions to get real reactions out of the actor to put it in the film. You know,
Mm-hmm.
it kind of reminded me of The Exorcist. When you seen The Exorcist, right?
Yeah, I've seen it.
You remember that scene where she throws up on his face?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, the director told was it William? The director told the actor who was playing the priest that it was getting aimed towards his chest. He lied to him. It aimed it right at his mouth, right at
Oh
his
my god.
face, to get like a real reaction. And I talked about this with another guest where we talked about The Exorcist. It was a kind of agreed upon, like that's an asshole move, you know. And it's
Mm-hmm.
not the first time you hear like a director trying to like scare or surprise the actor to get a genuine reaction out of them,
Mm-hmm.
where they could have just acted in the first place. So that's what
Right.
that scene reminded me of. Like
Yeah.
he got her to actually faint, but for the
Yeah,
wrong
yeah, yeah,
scene.
yeah. Uh-huh. It's funny that you come up with this example that was a man, like that it was like the priest being caught off guard to get a genuine reaction, because I feel like from what I've read and seen, it seems like a very common practice by male directors towards female actresses.
Mm-hmm.
That like the first example that comes to mind is Last Tango in Paris, I think.
Mm-hmm.
It was in the 70s, I think. I may be completely off. I believe it was a Bertolucci film. And there's this very famous, the fact that you don't have a reaction, I feel like you don't know what I'm about to say. There's a
No.
very famous scene where Marlon Brando has to, like, I think he has to rape the kid, like that in the film, he's raping the female character.
Mm-hmm.
But like the actress is told that they're not going to actually like like there's going to be no penetration involved, but then they like apparently Brando and the director had discussed it behind the scenes, or like basically we need to have like a genuine reaction, so he actually does like anally rape her.
Wow.
And they actually like I think like they use butter as like in the film he uses butter as lubricant, and then but in real life like he used butter as lubricant, so it's basically like like this actress was raped, and it was like this whole big scandal. I don't know if it's something that's like very heavily and this is like a very extreme example obviously,
Mm-hmm.
but I feel like it's very common practice, like if you read about like the amount of harassment that Shelley Duvall faced during the filming of The Shining. Just in general, like a lot of women are kind of like smacked around, berated. There's a story by Meryl Streep on, what is that movie called? The one with the divorce, where she was with Dustin Hoffman. I can't believe I'm blanking on this right now. But basically it was a film where she and Dustin Hoffman were two parents that were fighting for custody of their child when they were getting divorced. And he would like actually like there would be scenes when I don't know if he had to hit her or he would just hit her to get like a reaction.
Mm-hmm.
But there's just like a lot of cases of like alienation of like female like actors on set in order to get that genuine reaction on screen. So, and like there were cases of that in this film too, in Peeping Tom. Like I was gonna say, like Michael Powell, there were certain practices that he did with one of the actresses. Her name's Pamela Green, and she plays a model in the movie. And there were just so many like behind the scenes stories that I read about like how she was treated by him, and it's fascinating because like I'm watching the movie and I'm thinking about how much it's talking about like how it's kind of exposing, like I said, like the violence against women, like how women are being fetishized and objectified. There's like a certain awareness to it. Like this is a director who's aware of the fact that film objectifies women, and yet you would think because there's an awareness to it, like the director would be above that. But it sounded like no, he was very much also objectifying like his own actors.
Was this the with Pamela Green, she was like the model that was eventually killed, right, in the movie.
Yeah, she was the blonde one. I think before
Right.
I think this was her first acting job. That she as a model, like she was a model in real life, and she
Mm-hmm.
had been hired to like play this model for the movie. And there were just like a lot of things where like during like promotional shoots, I think there was this one story that I read where there was like promotional shoots of like her on the bed, and she was like, I think either naked or like half dressed, and Powell had brought his sons onto the set, like 8-year-old sons onto the
Wow.
set, and they were like behind the camera, and she was like, I don't like, what are they doing here? And he was like, don't worry about them, I just wanted them to like see what filming is like. And yeah, so they just like sat there and like watched her undress and like watched her be like, you know, photographed for either the promotions or to film the scene. And it's just, I don't know, it's just like really weird seeing like how self-aware the film was, but then also recognizing that like that doesn't stop them from actually objectifying women in real life.
Yeah. That's fucking wild. um where do I go from here?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm like talking so much about like, oh, misogyny and like, you know, violence against women, but it's because like that's a huge part of the film, and it's a huge part of the film industry in general.
Yeah.
Was there another scene that really stuck out to you?
I think when what's her name? Helen goes to first meet him like in the apartment, and he leads her into his own cinema, like the dark room.
Mm-hmm.
And then she asked him like, well, what were you watching before I got here? And he's so close to showing her what he actually was making, and he's like, wait a
Mm-hmm.
minute. And then he first of all, like, wait, you're actually gonna show her? Like it was actually a thought in your head that you're gonna show her like you
Right, or
murdered
it's like, what's
someone.
the thought process there?
And he's like, but he stopped himself and then showed her his childhood and how he was the subject of torment from his own father, and
Mm-hmm.
how his father someone said this on Letterboxd where like what's the thought process behind the father to say like, you know what, I'm gonna turn my son into like just the freakiest little guy, you know. um and then just seeing like how at first it looks all innocent and everything, like you kind of think, oh, it's a whole movie, and you kind of see like,
Mm-hmm.
wait, what did his dad do to him, you know,
Mm-hmm.
like he kind of turned him into like a peeping tom and kind of encouraged that behavior, but also wanted to see his reaction to fear. And
Right.
I thinking about the movie now, there's like you see like a light shining on him as a boy, the light
Mm-hmm.
shining on him, and you kind of curious like what is that, what was he doing? But then later on you kind of see like the same similar effect go happening on the women that he murders. And he basically did what his father did to him to other women, like he showed their own face of terror to them as he's about to kill them. um
Mm-hmm.
but yeah, I was just like, a lot's going on here, a lot's going on here. But yeah,
I love that you brought up that showing the fear to the women, like that use of the mirror. It's something that I've brought up a lot before with Dario Argento, which is why that's why I was like such a huge fan of this film, because I'm like watching it like, and I'm like, oh my god, this is so related to Dario Argento, and just like voyeur, because like there's a lot of voyeurism in like, I'm like thinking of like who else does it. There's a lot of voyeurism in Hitchcock, Dario Argento. I'm trying to think. There are definitely other like directors who are famous for it. But so the thing that it made me think of immediately was the story of Medusa, and how like, you know, like it's the idea of like the being petrified by Medusa's eyes. Like I've always been fascinated by that story, and it's something that I've always related to film. And it's because of the fact that we have like the gaze, right? It's like who's looking at who, or who's looking at whom, who is doing the looking, what is looking, and what is the effect of being seen or looking. And it's something that I've related specifically to Medusa, but also just the sirens and in the Odyssey, just the idea of like men feeling the need to perceive women. This sounds silly, but it's like the fact that like men know that there's going to be a negative repercussion. Like I'm talking theoretically here,
right,
that
right.
there's a negative repercussion to perceiving something. That being like hearing the siren song, you know you're gonna die. If you look at Medusa, you know you're gonna die. but there's still this temptation there. There's this need to perceive. And that's why there's this aspect of voyeurism to it. It's that there's this, like, you know, if you get caught, there's going to be a negative repercussion to it, but there's this need, this intrinsic need to perceive. And so I find it fascinating because of the fact that, like, in Medusa, Perseus comes with his shield, and he uses this shield or mirror or whatever, to reflect Medusa's gaze back at her. And so her gaze petrifies herself. And I think that that's very similar to the movie, where you see, like, the mirror reflecting the image of the woman back at herself. And it just always reminds me of Medusa. And Medusa is something that I've thought of whenever I've watched, like, Dario Argento films. There's this movie called Deep Red that I thought of, like, so many times as I was watching it, because there's this use of, like, the mirror a lot, and, like, how the reflection kind of throws your gaze back at yourself. But yeah, I've just always been like, that's, like, I want, like, the reason I'm so excited when I, like, brought it up immediately is because I've been wanting to write a paper about, like, the, like, Medusa and gaze and film for the longest time, but I've never had the ability to articulate it, which shows, I think, right now, because I'm kind of rambling. But I think this is the movie that, like, really, really would be able to, like, give an example of that. Like, demonstrate that, it, like, at least give some evidence to what I'm kind of like discussing. But yeah, there's, like, it's really fascinating that, like, it basically just brings up the idea of the gaze, like, who's watching whom, what does the look mean, what is the power of the look, which ties into, like, Laura Mulvey, who you said that she did the commentary for the film for the Criterion recording, right? Did you watch that, the commentary?
I did, and I took some notes in it, and then it gets to a certain point where I kind of got distracted, so I wasn't paying attention to the whole thing. But before I get into that, you said, like, the danger of perceiving in, like, Greek mythology. What's that Greek myth of that guy that goes into the underworld to find his lover, and the only way he can bring her back?
Orpheus, yeah, Orpheus and Eurydice.
Yeah, and then, like, he looks back and he can't bring her back anymore.
I didn't think about that one as, like, an example. Yeah, like, the danger of perceiving. Yeah.
Like, bro, you just had to have faith a little bit. Just keep going. We were talking about, so, like, the cuts that were made in the film. She said, like, they're, like, puns, like, in the film, where, like, there's one scene where the executive producer or whatever, he pours a shot of whiskey, and then it cuts to someone pouring a cup of coffee, right? Or it was, like, the other way around. And then I think it was after he watches, like, a movie or whatever, the director yells cut. It's like a J cut, you know, it's like a J cut in the film. You hear the word cut before you see the studio. And then the studio itself is cut to, like, a paper model of the studio. So, like, there's just a couple of examples of, like, those puns. Those are the two that, like, stuck out to me. And it reminds me of that one film. I forgot the name of it. It's like a very widescreen movie that was made in, like, the 50s or 60s, whatever. And I think it's Lawrence of Arabia.
I was gonna say, is it Lawrence of Arabia? But I didn't want to just make the assumption.
Where I think he has a candle or it's a match. He just, like, blows it out, and then it's, like, the sunrise. So, like,
okay, I didn't know that. That's cool.
So, like, there's a couple of times where that happens in Peeping Tom, but those were the two that I remember the most, like the pouring coffee to pouring whiskey, and then the director yelling cut before it actually cuts to the studio, and then the studio cutting to, like, a paper model of the exact same studio.
Right.
So that's what I got out of it. And then also she said something about, like, how the murder weapon itself is a phallic object as well. And I was like, I didn't think about that, you know?
I mean, I think I don't know if that's maybe something that I've just read a lot before, because there is, like, a lot of, like, I've definitely read before that, like, like, the phallic object being, like, the murder weapon being a phallic object, because a lot of times, like, it's a knife and there's just a phallicness to that. There was this movie I watched the other day. I think it was Miss 45.
Oh my God.
Have you seen it?
I love that movie. It's a really good one.
I really enjoyed it. It was a little intense, but
Yeah.
there's this at the end. There's this character who like she's gonna kill the main character. Like I think it's like a coworker, right? And
Mhm.
so she like the main character's like on like a rampage, like she's shooting people, and then the other character is gonna stab her from behind, and it's just like the most exaggeratedly obvious blocking I've ever seen in a film, because you just see her standing there with this like large butcher knife and she's holding it right by her crotch. Like it is like there's no like subtlety to it at all. Like it is very much like, oh, this knife, it's a phallic object.
Yeah. I forgot about that part, to be honest. It's been a couple years since I've seen it, but I was like, it's like one of those movies like I'm gonna watch it and then like, oh, I actually liked it, you know?
Uh-huh. No,
um
it was definitely, I enjoyed the film. There's another example of that that's like empowering to women, I feel like. And it's in this is gonna be the stupidest thing to mention, but in Thor Ragnarok, when when they're on this ship and Valkyrie grabs this like huge gun, like huge like blaster of some sort,
mhm.
and she like locks it into place, but it's like right by where like basically where her like hips and crotch are,
Mhm.
and it just basically is, I think, supposed to emulate like a strap on. Um and it was just to me like the 180ness of that is like, here you have like a character that I think is supposed to be kind of emulating masculinity in a way that's like oppressive, versus Valkyrie emulating masculinity in a way that feels liberating to women.
It's an interesting
But
take.
that's like a whole other conversation. But yeah, I mean, like going back to like Laura Mulvey, like she talks, like in her paper in Visual Pleasure, I think she does talk about like the camera as phallus a lot.
Mhm. Yeah, so
I think you read it more recently. I read it like several years ago, so I don't really. I would might maybe need a little bit of a refresher, but
so I didn't get to that part. Like I think I told you before we started recording how um reading Laura Mulvey's essay reminded me of how much I hated reading academic writing back in college, because it is very much like that. But luckily, I had a textbook on documentary that I still have from college, and it basically describes like the three looks in her essay.
mm-hmm.
So the male gaze is like coined by her. It's like a theory that cinema narratives and portrayals of women in cinema are constructed in an objectifying and limiting manner to
Mm-hmm.
satisfy like the psychological desires of men and more broadly in the patriarchal society. And she talks about three looks or perspectives of
Right,
in
right.
film. There's
Mm-hmm.
the perspective of the camera, perspective of the audience, and the perspective of the character. So the
Mm-hmm.
camera, it shows like the initial what's included in the film and what's not included in the film, like scenes, characters, and how the person holding the camera kind of chooses what's being shown and how it's being shown. And
Right.
the perspective of the audience is more, she talks more in the sense of like going to the theater, how the room is darkened and it's encouraged to be silent to watch the movie, and just the look of the audience looking into like the film. And then the
Mm-hmm.
documentary book didn't go further into like the third look, which is the perspective of the characters. But she said like the experience of the characters in the film allows them to interact and gain understandings that are then available to the audience. So it mimics the perspective of like real life in a way. But that perspective I'm not too familiar with, you know, so I take that with a grain of salt. But those are
Mm-hmm.
the three looks: the camera, the audience, and the characters.
That I do remember, and I think that's. I think a lot of people, if they've read the paper or if they've like heard of Laura Mulvey, they think more of the male gaze aspect of the
Mm-hmm.
paper and her theories. And I do think that's revolutionary, and I do think it's important to talk about. But I think that it makes it so limiting. It makes it sound like that the paper is just about like female objectification in cinema, as opposed to just overarchingly like how does cinema function. So I think that breaking it down into like the three gazes is like something that does not get discussed enough, and I think it's
Mm-hmm.
a reason that everyone should not necessarily read it but familiarize themselves with this article, because I think understanding those three gazes in cinema is incredibly important to understanding the medium.
Yeah, and the thing that I noticed, like, I had like a very basic understanding of male gaze. I learned it in school, but um,
Mm-hmm.
we've seen very obvious examples of it in media, like with Transformers when Shia LaBeouf's character is looking at Megan Fox's character, with her looking under the hood of a car.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like she's supposed to be sexy. It shows her as a sexy woman, whatever. Like she's obviously like the love interest, and it's a very obvious way of looking at male gaze. It might be because I just didn't prepare for it. Like other ways, like how it's like a patriarchal society that uses the male gaze. But the one thing I want to talk about specifically is the perspective of the audience. That's the one I noticed more in real life than I do. Like I see more examples of it, you know?
Okay.
So, and this is more in terms of like what's happening now. So we have cameras and social media, like it's like part of our daily lives, you know? It is so easy to just get a camera. Our phones have cameras, right? And it's also very easy to take candid videos or photos of people and humiliate them or mock them on the internet because they're different, and not realizing the power that you have of doing that, you know, of ruining someone's life because they're different, because they look weird, or because they do something in a certain way that you wouldn't agree with. And that's kind of like, see, like the modern type of voyeurism that's more accepted, you know? And another example I see is like with parents scolding their children for the camera, where like they punish their children, like saying like, oh, you didn't get an A, you got an F on this assignment. No school, no video games or whatever. Or I'm going to shave your head to look like an old man because you try to act like an older man. And that's available for everyone to see, and how the majority of people just don't see what's wrong with that, or if they do, it's sometime later. So in that sense, like with the parent example, it's more like the camera holder who has the power, which is the parent, but also the audience of like encouraging them. So
right. I think anyone honestly who uses like their children, or children in general, but like especially their own children for content, is disturbing to me.
Yeah.
Like, and they should watch, I think, Peeping Tom, just so that they're, I like genuinely, because he talks about his father being a scientist, and like how like, you know, like, oh, it's for research. And like, so you see people like talking about like, there are people who have like talked about like recording like their entire, like their children growing up just for research purposes. Like, and that's a lot of like, if you like watch like YouTubers with like parents and their kids, and it's like, they use them as like content slash like record for like a database of some sort, like of information. And I think that's really, there should be more rights, I think, for the children against that, to protect themselves against that. Because I don't think that their physicality, that their lives should be broadcast. But that's also just a huge thing with social media in general now, like you were saying, that like people just broadcast their lives for content, for views, and it just, yeah, I think that like as a society, I'm curious like what, especially TikTok, I feel like just in general, I'm curious how that's going to affect people growing up, to constantly have the camera pointed at themselves on purpose, right? Some people like recording themselves and then posting online, but also just this constant awareness of the fact that you could be being filmed, and like that could be being published without your consent. I know I'm hyper aware of that. Like a lot of times, when I'm in public, I tend to like people, if I see them pointing their camera towards me, even if it's not like at me necessarily, but just like they're trying to take a picture of like what's behind me, I get very irritated. Because I'm like, I don't know where you're going to post that. Like, I don't know like what, you know, what you're going to use that for. And I just don't like ask me to move, like don't take my picture, you know, like I just get very personally irritated with it, because I just don't need that broadcast, especially with like AI nowadays. I think God. I've seen people being able to be like, there's like AI that's able to recognize people's pictures. So basically, like if anyone anywhere takes a picture of you or has like a video of you, like this AI can identify you. And so there's just like a record somewhere of like all of these pictures that you're not even aware of existing, but that it can be tagged to your name, basically. I have a twin sister, so I don't know if, I mean, we look very different, but now I'm curious of like if how good this technology is, and if it would take pictures of her and think it's me. But yeah, just like this constant awareness of being watched by other people, and the fact that you're not just being watched by the people around you, because anything anywhere can be broadcast to the entire world.
Right.
So I don't know if you're familiar with the concept of the panopticon. It was not developed by Foucault, but it was mentioned by him in his book Discipline and Punish. But it's basically this idea of having like a jail where all of the
it's like a tower and all the jails like around them.
Oh, around it, yeah. And
so
the people don't know, the people in the cells don't know if they're being watched, but they know that there's always the possibility that they're being watched. And that's just kind of how I feel a lot with like going out nowadays, because you don't know if you're being watched, but there's always this awareness that you could be being recorded. And it's a panopticon that's basically like global at this point.
Yeah.
Because you could, without your knowledge, being viewed by anyone anywhere in the entire world, because someone recorded you and they posted you online, or because you're on some kind of like live stream that you're not aware of. Mm-hmm. And I think obviously like I'm being paranoid in doing that, and I know that that's very like, it's very unlikely that I'm going to be recorded, especially because I'm very aware of it. But I just think it's very telling of like what this generation is kind of experiencing.
Yeah, and this is going back towards like children being on camera, being used for content, and. Mm-hmm. This probably like we're kind of backtracking a little bit, but this reminds me of this kid Ryan's World, whatever, where when he was a very small child, like 4 or 5, his parents recorded him reacting to like an unboxing of toys, you know, and it got very popular because a lot of the viewers are children, you know, like children like seeing like surprises and stuff, and they milked that as much as they can to the point where like he got brand deals. There's like Ryan's World eggs, like Easter eggs full of toys. They're always like different every time. And the thing is, he grew up, you know, he's now like a teenager. I'm not sure how old he is, but like I saw like a recent clip of him. It just came up on like Twitter, and he looks like a teenager, like 16 maybe. He's starting to grow a mustache, whatever, and he's still reacting to the toys. But you see how he's kind of irritated at this point, because like
still, oh my god,
like his parents are milking him for like this content, and
that's crazy.
I'm just thinking like it's just like the exploiting of this child, and like they just kept using it. Like it's not exploiting in the sense of like abuse, but like exploiting like the content, like the money out of it.
Yeah, no, that's exploitation, definitely.
Okay, so yeah, I used it correctly. And they just won't let it go, or they don't have any plans for like when he moves out of the house, or if he goes to college or whatever. I mean, he can't keep doing toy reactions when he's not in it. Like when he's like, he looks like he's a little too old for the toys too. So yeah, that's what it just reminded me of as well.
I mean, going back to like the Laura Mulvey essay, like the whole, like she does talk about like active versus passive figures, and how the person behind the camera is the subject and the person in front of the camera is the object. And I think that kind of goes to what you're saying, because I don't think it's just like a female-male dynamic. I think it's basically like at any given moment, the person behind the camera is the one in charge, and the person in front of the camera is the one being not necessarily taken advantage of, but like, or exploited, but like that they are in the position to be able to be exploited. Like, like let's say like if you're recording, like if a woman is being photographed, then she is the object. If a woman is photographing herself, the only reason that she's not being exploited isn't because in front of the camera she's not being exploited, it's because she's also the person behind the camera, if that makes sense. So her liberation isn't because she's no longer an object, it's that she's also the subject.
Right, okay.
If that makes sense.
And I remember exactly where I was going to talk about. Okay, so now we're back. Okay. I do jiu-jitsu. Where like the gym I was at, I kind of had an issue with them like taking photos or videos for social media, because one, I never signed a consent form for use my photographs. There was nothing in the contract that I may be photographed at any moment, that I'm okay with it, whatever. Nothing in that saying any. I read it. You know, I'm very particular about like my image, and two, because you're using my image and my body to build your own brand, and you didn't even ask me for permission. You just say, hey guys, is it okay if I film this real quick? It's for social media. Like, sure. No, there was none of that. Just automatically assume that since you're at this gym, you assume that you can be photographed at any moment when there's no indication that was going to happen. And then every time it happens, I move away. But like these guys, like, I guess they took some film course, whatever, like move the camera, move your body with the, so like you kind of get a gist of like how many people are at this gym, just to show like we're such a successful gym. Look at how many people are at this gym. And I'm like, bro. And it got to the point where I think it was like when I first started that membership, there was a video of me. I wasn't the subject of the video, but I was in the background, and you can kind of see I'm noticeable in there. And I didn't ask to be, no one asked me to be a part of this video. And so I talked to the trainer. I said, hey, I'm not okay with that. And he's like, okay, fine. And then he kind of just laughed it off with like someone else, like one of the other trainers. But I was just like, no, like, first of all, I'm already paying a lot of money to be here. But also you're kind of making money off of me. You're making money off of me, like both from like the membership and also for me being here, like the image of me in your videos, you know, like I may not be the pull for people, you know, I can understand that, but just like me as an extra in the film, I have a huge issue with that. And I'm with you on that. Like at any moment you can be recorded without your knowledge. And sometimes they caught me without my knowledge. I was like how big of a deal can I make this, you know?
Yeah. Especially commercially, like I'm 100% with you there, because I feel like a lot of times things are being used for advertising purposes. That it's like, I didn't sign a consent form. Like I'm not okay with this. Like I don't want you putting my image anywhere. I like to be a very anonymous person. Like I don't like have a social media presence. Like I don't like usually put my like image or opinions out there. So for other people to do without my consent is very, very like it's a raw nerve for me, basically.
Gotcha. So getting back to Peeping Tom.
The movie we watched, and we're here to discuss.
So another thing I want to like talk about is how much I love like the color and the production design that was made into this film. It's just such a rare art to see nowadays, where the only places that I've seen recently that you see production design are for like high budget movies. And this film wasn't particularly like a high budget movie. It might have been like a medium budget movie, but they used all of it. I guess they used all of it for like production design. And you can see how different like their worlds are. You can see how different Mark's world, like his own apartment, his dark room, his cinema room, is very different from Helen's room. And it's very different from like her living room. And just saying like all the aspects that you can see, like the characters, not just based off like how they act, but based on like where they live. So that's something I really liked about this movie.
Yeah, it's really beautiful, and it's very like there's a lot of thought that went into it. I think especially because of the fact that they knew that it was a movie about making movies. I think they paid a lot of attention to like how, like when you think about it, like I didn't even like I'm just thinking about this now that like you're talking about the difference between Mark's apartment and Helen's apartment, and hers looks like a set and his looks like it's like a studio, like it's where you develop the film. So it's basically like her apartment is what's in front of the camera and his apartment's what's behind the camera.
Exactly.
You know, like he's behind the scenes and she's like hers very much looks like a stage. Like it looks like this like, you know, very theatrical, very kind of Hitchcock, like everything's kind of very pretty. And like even like you mentioned, like this little like paper set that they had of the set within the film. Like I think they were very aware of like what looks like a set and like making things look very set like versus making things look very real.
Yeah, I like that.
You also mentioned the color, and one thing that I noticed was like the use of like red and green, which I don't know if it was just in general very popular at the time, but I definitely noticed a lot in Hitchcock and in Dario Argento. Specifically for Dario Argento, I think Suspiria uses it a lot, and then for Hitchcock, it reminds me of Vertigo. I don't know if you remember like that. There's like a lot of use of red and green in Vertigo. Yeah, and I'm curious if there's like a color theory reason, if there's like maybe just like those were, maybe there's a practical reason, like, you know, Technicolor, maybe those were just colors that stood out a lot more on film. but I noticed that was used a lot in this movie, and especially a lot of movies in that time period. And I want to look more into that and like find out why exactly red and green were so prominent.
Yeah. And so I want to talk about like the reception of that this movie originally received when it came out. It was not
No.
well received at
Not
all.
very good.
No, people hated it. They kept making fun of it, and
Not
I
even just
guess
the audience, but like the
critics as well.
Like, right? Yeah.
And I think someone, I forgot who said it. I think it was another critic later on, like many years later, who said like it kind of got to the point like they kind of like enjoyed making fun of this movie, enjoyed criticizing this movie, and it's hard for me to like see it, but I'm trying to like understand it from the context of like what movies were like then. But I haven't watched a lot of movies from then as well. So do you have like an idea like what could have been the reason why it wasn't well received?
Oh, I'm so glad you asked me. I've been excited for this question because for me there are two main questions for me, and like there are two main theories. And it's either because remember this is considered one of the first slasher films. So was it like that the audience was just horrified at this like very explicit, very honest representation of violence and gore on camera, even though we said like there wasn't a lot of actual blood, but just like people being murdered on camera, and just like the terror of that. And the other one, which I think is probably more honest, is I think people were horrified by the fact that it was kind of like a film that turned the mirror back at themselves. It was kind of people being told, like, hey, you're voyeurs. Like, you're coming into this movie, like into this theater, and you're coming to watch women get undressed, and you're coming to watch like a film that exploits people. And I think it's basically the gaze being turned back at themselves. The awareness. I think it was a movie that was very aware of what film was. And I think that people didn't want to be aware of themselves. I think people wanted to go to films for escapism and to recognize that they are an active part of movie going, as opposed to just watching something completely separate from themselves on the screen. I think was very scary for a lot of people to be told you are a voyeur. I think that it's a movie that goes out of its way to show how like to demonstrate those gazes that exist within film that a lot of other movies kind of go out of their way to not show. One example I think of is for that Christopher Nolan, when he made, this is like a very like separate example, like I'm bringing the Christopher Nolan out of it, but when he made The Dark Knight, in the comics, Bruce Wayne's parents were killed when they were coming out of a movie theater. They were coming out of a movie theater and they were murdered in an alley. And when he made it, he was like, I'm not going to show them coming out of a movie. So I'm going to show them coming out of an opera. Because he knew that if he showed people coming out of a movie theater, then there was going to be this, even if it was only momentary, there was going to be this sudden awareness of people in the theaters watching Dark Knight, recognizing that they were watching people, so that you become self-aware. You become like you're watching people in a cinema, so you're like, oh, I'm currently in a cinema, even if it's momentary. Like obviously you get back into the story, it takes you out of the story and into your own body for a moment. And I think that's literally all Peeping Tom was doing, is it was forcing you to recognize like your place in film, that you're sitting here. It's a very self-aware film, and it forces the audience to be self-aware. And I think that was very scary for a lot of people to have that gaze turned back at themselves. So I think that's probably one of the reasons, because Psycho came out, I think 1 or 2 months afterwards, and it was again also like this gory like slasher film. Like it was this like scary movie. Like it wasn't like a slasher film in the sense that like, you know, you have all of these different women being murdered, but it was violent and it was scary and it was a thriller. But it was received in the complete opposite fashion. Like people were raving about it even today. Like you mentioned Psycho, everyone knows it. So I don't think it was so much the goriness of it. I think it was because Psycho didn't force people to look at themselves the same way that Peeping Tom did. So that's my opinion.
No, that's a very good analysis. I like your answer. It kind of reminds me of Scream a little bit, you know, because
yeah, self-aware.
It's so self-aware, but it was still received well. Could it have been like the audience like acknowledged their place later on, like they acknowledged like the voyeurism, or they just became more film literate? So that's another
It might
question.
have been a generational thing, I think, because maybe by the time Scream came out, it was like in the 90s, and I think a lot of people were becoming more self-aware of like people were willing to look at themselves more. They were willing to like look at culture and see how society was reflecting itself, if that makes sense.
I see.
Whereas I think people wanted escapism. They wanted to be able to like watch something without thinking about how they interacted with it.
Yeah, exactly. I think we briefly mentioned, or you briefly mentioned, how it's hard to understand it's hard to look at this movie from the perspective of someone who isn't a filmmaker or a film enthusiast, because like, how would they perceive it? Like like you said, like, would they perceive it as like a regular slasher movie, or just like a movie about a movie about a movie?
Yeah.
So I'm curious, like, if for anyone out there, I'm talking to you, dear listener. Are you a filmmaker, film enthusiast? If so, did you like this movie? If you don't consider yourself a film enthusiast, please watch this movie. Or if you haven't watched this movie, what did you think of it? Like, are you seeing it as how we're seeing it, or are you seeing it in a completely different way? I'm curious. I broke the fourth wall.
And do you enjoy it? I think is the main question. Like, do you come out of it like as like the critics did back then and being like, oh, I hated it. It was too self-aware, too meta. Or do you come out of it with like a sense of like, okay, that was actually really interesting and really well made, and it was very enlightening,
For sure. So do you think like this movie like might not impact, will influence your writing, or later on? Did it give you ideas, or?
Yeah, no, I definitely think it'll influence my writing. I think it definitely made me really want to write that piece, or at least like put more effort into that piece that I was talking about with like Medusa and film, and like the idea of the gaze and perception and especially voyeurism. I think it made me really want to watch more gialli film, like get back into that. And I think like it really made me think about like the male gaze. And we've talked about this before, but like the internalization of the male gaze, and how I really want to, like, in everything I write, I want to, as much as possible, create women that are as authentic as they possibly can be, and actually subjects rather than objects. And how I think it's something that I think other women also struggle with, but I know personally for myself, it's something that it's an active thing. It's like, just because I'm a woman doesn't mean that I immediately know how to write women that aren't objectified, because that's all I know. Like, a lot of content that we consume is women being objectified. So you kind of internalize that gaze.
Yeah, for sure. I remember that comment from the museum.
Oh, right, yeah. In the museum. What were the movies that I listed? I was like, oh yeah, I really like, because I like a lot of like male directors, like David Fincher, Christopher Nolan. I like a lot of like Spielberg. So I was talking about like how some of my favorite movies are like Jurassic Park and Jaws.
Yeah.
Jurassic Park has like a few like interesting female characters. Well, that's another thing that I wanted to like talk about with the male gaze, is that I feel like a lot of people kind of interpret it as being inherently sexual. And I don't think it's necessarily always like you don't have to make a woman seem like a sex object to objectify her. I mean, I think like one example, you can interpret this as sexualized, but one example is like the manic pixie dream girl. I don't know if you're familiar with that trope.
I am, yeah.
But just like this idea of like the woman, like even if she's not like a sexual being, just like the idea of like a female character being used to add liveliness to the life of like a depressed male character.
Yeah.
That she's being viewed as an object because her only purpose in the film is to teach the like main character to embrace life. And it's this idea of like she's being looked at as an object. Yeah, like she's being objectified, even if it's not sexual. It's just like, oh, look how interesting and unique and quirky and weird she is. And like, I think a lot of things that people talk about with the male gaze is that it's diminishing, that it's like always looking at women as lesser. And even if it's like, let's say even if it's the opposite, it's like putting women on a pedestal. Even if you put women on a pedestal, it's still objectifying a woman, because it's creating this image of her as like a trophy, or this like untouchable divine object as opposed to a human being. So yeah, I think that's fascinating. That's what I'm talking about. Like, it's something I need to work on myself, because like I feel it can go into either extreme. Like, you can write this like really fascinating, interesting woman, but still like there's a part that's like, okay, well, am I objectifying her by just making her this like like putting her on a pedestal, basically, like creating this like divine image as opposed to like a real woman.
For sure.
So like you asked if it would influence my writing, and like I guess it really reinforced that in me, of just like of being aware of the gaze and like who is the object and who is the subject, and how are you utilizing that.
Yeah, I think it influenced my writing as well, and just like I said, just reminding myself of like the male gaze and how like I kind of benefit. I not kind of. I benefit from the patriarchy, you know. And just
yeah, probably.
I probably do. As a straight man, you know, but and just remembering like the power that the camera wielder holds. That's something that I got the most out of this movie, just like the power that the camera holds, and how you sometimes you don't realize it, or sometimes you do realize it, but you have to use it for good. You can't abuse it. But yeah, and you were talking about the Manic Pixie Dream Girl. It just reminded me of two movies that I really liked that kind of break it down. First one being Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, and also 500 Days of Summer, which
right.
I kind of wish I'd seen sooner.
Two prime examples.
Very good examples. And 500 Days of Summer, because I saw it when I was like 18 or something like that, and I was like, oh, like just like the way he objectified her into something like, but like that was like the expectation versus reality shots, you know?
Right. Like like idealization. That's what I'm talking about. Like, even if you're looking at someone in like this like rose-colored glass view, like you're not like, you know, diminishing them, but you're objectifying them. You're turning them into like this ideal human being as opposed to like a real, like fallible, like flesh and skin person.
For sure. So yeah, and for those of you who haven't listened to it, I do have an episode where I talk about 500 Days of Summer with Latest. I want to like.
I'll have to listen to that one.
I like that episode. And I want to kind of like finish or like kind of conclude this episode talking about the slasher film genre. I looked on studiobinder.com. It's one of my favorite websites, also my favorite YouTube channel about filmmaking in general. And they basically say like how the slasher film, it's kind of just a subgenre of horror film, and has like some elements to it, so such as it has to have effective killer, high body count, and the use of non-firearm weapons, and usually a final girl or like the final person who's either gonna die, the last person to die, or the person to survive. And I feel like this movie does meet all those elements of a slasher film, because he does kill them, you know. He does have a high body count. I guess more than one. I guess more than one is a high body count for killing people.
He had 3 at least that I can't remember.
And 3's a crowd. And he used a non-firearm weapon. It's a very unique weapon, a knife at the edge of at one of the ends of a tripod, which is quite a unique weapon for a filmmaker. Of all the objects that a filmmaker uses, I think that's quite. I'm saying this as if I know what to kill someone with, but I don't. So, like a mic stand, I don't know.
I mean, the ice pick, right? Like, not the ice pick, the icicle. Wasn't that like the perfect crime? If you stab someone with the icicle and then it melts.
They wouldn't melt in enough time. Like, depending on like the icicle, or like how, I don't know. But yeah. So this has all the elements of a slasher film. Yeah.
And you have the final girl too, because you have Helen surviving at the end.
Yeah. And it's a unique take on it, because like at first he was going to use her as a victim. Like, you see, like when she's first watching the film, like of his childhood, he wants to record her reaction, because he gets off on women's fear, like their look of fear. And then later on, she like jokingly points the camera to herself, and he's like, no, because he likes her. He's starting to like her. And then she kind of survived by being herself, you know?
That moment was also really interesting for me because he has this line where he says, like, everything that I photograph, I lose. So he was scared of putting the camera, like pointing the camera towards her because he didn't want to lose her. And I find that so fascinating because the whole point of photography is record. Like the whole, like, well, not the whole point, but like it's that you're creating something that is going to outlive you, basically, right? You take a picture of someone and unless it gets burned or thrown away, like that picture is going to outlast that person. We have pictures of people from like, you know, like the 1800s, right? Mm-hmm. Those people aren't alive anymore. So just the idea of that, usually film and photography is thought of as something as creating something immortal. And he's saying that anything I photograph, I lose. Like that he, by photographing something, he makes it mortal, which I find very fascinating.
I didn't think of it like that. But yeah. But we also discussed, like, before recording, another film, other films that this movie reminds us of, and you said, like, there's quite a few, and you're right.
So many.
There's quite a few.
Yeah.
The first one you mentioned was Nightcrawler, and
yeah,
it just reminded me of how I remember how, like, in the Civil War, like when they were photographing like the casualties of war, they would push all the bodies together to make it look more gruesome than it was, or like they'll put more bodies in the frame so it looks more gruesome, and they kind of like moved away from that practice to capture, because that was considered like actual documents of the war, but they manipulated the image, you know, and it wasn't like a common practice to like actually not do that. And then I guess like they kind of more moved over to like actually documenting as it is, or at least I hope so, because as we know, photos can be manipulated, well, through the camera or after the camera is taken. So in Nightcrawler, when like that final, it's not a final scene per se, but like I guess like the climax of the film where there's a car crash and he moves the body to like make it more gruesome, to capture it for the news, which will eventually be shown to the audience. So what are some other films that you thought of?
It really puts into question the idea of like documentary and like reality versus fantasy, and like what is narrative versus what is real. And like as soon as there was, when in my film class we were talking about documentary and how like, I guess it kind of goes back to the panopticon that like when you put a camera in front of somebody, they're gonna act differently. So like no matter what, it's like I've always kind of been dubious about like the reality of documentaries, because I don't know if you can get people's honest behavior if they're in front of a camera. But then the only way to do it otherwise would be to film them without their knowledge, which is exploitative.
Right.
But yeah, so I think that's like another thing that this movie definitely brings up, which is that very fine line between reality and fantasy that we talked about at the beginning too. We were talking about like how they push and they push and they push until like that actress actually faints instead of just pretending to faint. So I think there's a very fine line between, you know, reality and fantasy in film that's really interesting.
That kind of reminds me of David Fincher and how he'll do 100 takes until like it gets to the point where like it's natural for the actor and
to just break down.
Yeah, or like just to do a scene.
Or
like,
just they've done it so many times that it's just inherent at this point. Yeah.
Yeah, and I remember this conversation specifically because it was with Lin-Manuel Miranda. Like, so for those of you who don't know, I actually met the man. I'm not gonna go too into detail, but like Lynn's mom was also there, his parents were there, other people were there, and I was also there. And he was talking about how his friend, I think it was Jonathan Groff, who was in Hamilton. He played King George. He was in David Fincher's Night Hunter. And he later told him like the amount of takes it took because David wanted to get the most naturalistic response. Like he wanted to look natural for the actor. He didn't want to look like actors acting. It wanted to look like people in their element. And then Lynn's mom is like, why can't they just rehearse? And I'm like, thank you. Thank you. And I saw there was like an interview with David Fincher where he kind of justified it by saying like you spend all this money on a set and you're only going to use it for like one take or as little takes as possible and then move on. I prefer to like stay as long as possible. But I'm like, no, dude, like No, like I can understand a little bit, but you kind of go overboard with it. Like 100
Yeah.
takes, bro. Who are you? And
It's a bit much.
and I say this with full knowledge that I may be working with some of these people, like, but like it's not something I wouldn't say to them. Like I'm the type of guy like if I have a criticism for you, I'm gonna tell you, but I'm not gonna be mean about it, right? I'm not Ayo Edebiri saying like Jennifer Lopez is a scam, like her career is a scam. Eventually having her be the musical guest as she hosted for Saturday Night Live. No, I'm David Fincher, Mr. Fincher. I'm telling you, I'm saying this with the expectation that you may not listen, but if you do, could we at least cut it down to 50 takes? At least. But yeah.
I think he's someone with at least enough of a reputation that he can ask for 100 takes, which I think is awesome. Like, who's going to say, no, I'm not going to do 100 takes to David Fincher?
I probably would. I probably would. I have like this grandiose vision of myself that's probably not real, but sometimes I'm like, I'm too good for this. But then I kind of not, but also I could be. I
think that's a little bit of the patriarchy in you. It's a little bit of the,
you're right.
the male entitlement.
You're right. I mean, yeah. Who'd have thought? Not me. But you kind of have to have a little bit of self-delusion to be successful in this society.
Oh,
unfortunately.
Yeah. 100%. Yeah.
Yeah. What are some other films that this movie made you think of?
Oh, let's see. I think I wrote some down.
I made a list on Letterboxd, by the way.
Oh, I should have done that. I mean, Dario Argento films in general, so like it really made me think of specifically, he has a movie called Bird with Crystal Plumage. Really made me think of that one. Deep Red. There's this movie called Black Christmas that came out in the 70s.
Yeah.
And that's, some people have mistakenly called that one like the first slasher film. And I definitely think it was influenced by this film a lot. Rear Window, because of the voyeurism to it.
Yeah, for sure.
And then, like we said, like Nightcrawler. It's actually funny that you mentioned like Scream, because I think this movie is actually referenced in, I think it was Scream 4. I think like on during one of the calls when he's like asking, like they ask him questions and like if you answer right then I won't kill you, and he asks like what was the first slasher film, and he gives her like a bunch of options, and he says it was actually none of the above, it was Peeping Tom. I think that I don't think that was how I ended up putting it on my watch list, although it might have been, and I'll be embarrassed if that's how I first heard of this movie.
Don't be embarrassed about that.
Yeah, those are the ones that, what were the movies that it made you think of?
So some of them you already said. You said Nightcrawler, Rear Window for sure, because like it is central to its plot. The voyeurism, like that's the whole thing.
Yeah.
Also made me. I just saw Amelie yesterday, and Amelie is all about her watching other people live their lives, and then also how her neighbor also watches her as she's going about her life as well. And it's not in the sense like the horror aspect of it, more like the voyeurism aspect. Yeah. So, and also Disturbia.
I was gonna mention Disturbia.
And also,
but that's like, it's back to like slasher and thriller aspects.
Exactly, and just like influence from like Rear Window as well. And the other two I added just because you kind of think about it when you think about this movie is Vertigo and Psycho. So
yeah, 100%.
For those of you who are on Letterboxd, I have a list called movies you can watch after seeing Peeping Tom, and I list all those movies there. So whether you want to go from like horror to thriller or from horror to whimsical, I got it right there.
I need to find like non-horror or non like thriller films that remind me of this movie, that like exhibit voyeurism in a way that's not like necessarily a thriller.
Mm-hmm. I think Amelie is a good example.
Yeah.
What else?
I feel like probably Brian De Palma has a lot of films that are about voyeurism.
What's the
Dress to Kill?
Yes.
I think is his.
Yeah.
I haven't seen it, but I think I've read that like it was like panned by critics when it first came out. So I feel like it probably has similar like aspects to it that Peeping Tom had of like voyeurism and like the slasher aspects, the thriller aspects, and Yeah, it's on my list. I have to watch it, but I just haven't seen it yet.
All right, and with that, we are done. Thank you so much, Kat, for being with us today. I really appreciate our talk about this film, Peeping Tom. And I want to ask you real quick, was the movie a hit or a miss with you?
100% a hit.
Yeah. For me, it missed so bad that it actually hit. That's a lie. That's a lie.
Okay, I was going to say, explain that. I want to know.
That's a lie. It was a hit for me as well. I really like this movie, and I think they're gonna renew it again for the Criterion Collection, because the Criterion Collection movie I saw for this film, it was from the 90s, but they're gonna renew it again for I believe 4K on Blu-ray. So
Cool,
I find
okay.
myself buying that at least for during the half off special coming up soon. So do you have anything you want to promote?
Off the top of my head, there's this organization in Miami called Camila's House, and it basically provides housing and resources for homeless people. I think it's been running for about 60 years now, and I've just heard so many good things about this organization. So yeah, just the more donations that we can get, the more resources, volunteers, that'd be great. And I'm just, promoting them for doing a great job and doing a real service for our community.
Awesome. That sounds great. I appreciate that for you mentioning that. Thank you again for being here, and thank you, listener, for tuning in. And until next time, cross off a new film from your list.
Thank you so much for having me. This was a lot of fun.